let's quickly delve into this idea of analytics for financial crime. And financial crime, obviously, as we've been saying, is a key worry for many of the banks. Tomorrow at Sibos, a session is going to look at how banks can improve their ability to prevent and detect criminal activities. Well, joining us now, we have a panel of esteemed guests to talk just about that. Daniel Buckingham joins us. He is the head of transaction monitoring at Barclays. Michael Cho is also with us, Global AML Compliance, the Northern Trust Company, and Dr. Tony Wicks, head of product at Omnicision. Gentlemen, thanks so much for joining us. And you guys are all here because this is the first time we've had a compliance forum at Sibos. Tell us what you think about that.
Yeah, no, so far it's been really interesting, especially the opening forum this morning there with Mr. Zubin. It was really good to, get some feedback from them, and they're definitely engaging with the industry more. So it was, very informative and a good kick-off to the compliance side of things.
I think it's a true milestone. I think historically the compliance folks have kind of been kept in the back in the closet somewhere, and so I think it's really a great, it shows great progress for us to be here and be partnering with our, the business people that we work with every day.
Yeah, and as Michael says, I think it really shows the changing role of compliance. I think it's recognised now that good compliance is actually good for good business, and rather than being an inhibitor to business, good compliance really is an enabler. And that's, very significant.
And you guys were telling me before we all got mic'd up and started the show that you were always spending time and getting to know each other because nobody else was hanging out with the compliance guys. So you're all great friends. Now, let's talk about this issue of financial crime specifically as it relates to the challenges that banks are facing in this area. What are the main challenges?
Yeah, well, I mean, with the increase in regulation and the speed at which it's actually happening, the capability for banks to be able to make decisions, is increasing, and the speed and accuracy of those decisions needs to be there as well. So, part of the challenge is really understanding what is the information that we have at hand, what does it really mean, and an example that could be looking at how KYC information has changed over the last 10 years, and the increase there, and how have we actually captured it, how accurate, how complete, etc. That all has an impact on the analytical function.
So I think maybe 6 or 7 years ago the trend was, or the movement was to go out and purchase, expensive and complicated software. And I think, especially this year and maybe last year, what we're seeing with some of these public enforcement actions is no longer is it good enough to just turn on your software. You really have to tune it. You have to be smart about it. You have to analyze the data that comes out of it. So it's quite a different environment.
Yeah, and I think following on from that, really, the buzzword in banking generally, but especially in terms of compliance, is transparency. So it's actually understanding what your systems do, how can you characterize what those systems do, and how can you optimize and make those systems more efficient. And ultimately that comes down to your ability to test those things. So it's absolutely key, I think, moving forward, that people actually understand what their systems are actually capable of, but also, do they meet the task that they're set out to enforce?
Well, let's talk about these tools that help people understand just exactly that, these analytics. What exactly are they? Give me some examples, some practical examples of what people can actually do with them.
Yeah, I mean, in the banks, I mean, we're all implementing systems for the various different, financial crime disciplines which have analytical capabilities like customer profiling and looking at the transactional activity of what the customers are doing to make decisions around. Or we might actually be putting in our own type of analytical capabilities. Might be a global oversight and governance piece. So you're looking at a more holistic view and trying to aggregate it up and make sure that you're comfortable with the risk profile that's being accepted within the bank.
And I know this is what Tony does for a living, so I'll let him talk about the sophistication of it. But I would also add that I think that analytics doesn't necessarily have to be complicated. So I was in Beirut performing a training for some Iraqi bank examiners, and really data for them was really Excel spreadsheets, just tracking payments. How many payments were made on this day and who they were paid to. And what we did is just help them by simple pivot tables to really try to identify some trends. So it doesn't necessarily have to be very sophisticated.
No, and I think that's a very important point. You know, the key to a successful analytics is to be able to encode what is the sort of business or human problem. You know, how do you recognize your risks? You know, compliance, and the big driver behind compliance is the notion of a risk-based approach. So you need to be able to represent your risk. You need to be able to encode that risk. And if the analytics you're using is just purely too complicated for that process, you know, how can you see that? How does it work? Yeah. What's the transparency associated with that?
Give me some examples. I mean, you do this for a living. You obviously advise a lot of different banks, a lot of different companies. What is it that banks are actually asking for specifically at the moment right now?
Well, so fundamentally, most of the systems are doing what I would consider to be behavioral characterization of individuals, of the transactions that they're actually involved in, and then looking for outliers and patterns associated with those transactions that are notional differences or something that could represent potentially a risk, but equally those sorts of same systems are being used to apply to identify opportunities at institutions as well. And we're also looking across in terms of those kinds of techniques and technologies, in terms of looking at different groups of individuals and how their behaviors and characterization of those behaviors can be compared, and that's important.
How can SWIFT play a role in helping you do what you need to get done?
Well, I mean, you know, it's a community. I mean, compliance is, and especially financial crime, is non-competitive. So, you know, SWIFT has a good presence and a forum in which that we can all come together in order to try and start looking at standards and approaches in order to try and achieve a common goal without, you know, having a competitive nature to it.
So I think SWIFT, I agree with Daniel. I think they're so well positioned just because of the membership. So I think you don't have that many opportunities where all the banks are using the same systems, whereas you know, the SWIFT network actually provides an opportunity to maybe, with some technology or innovation, have some consistency, as opposed to where it is right now, where I think banks are a little bit on the defensive, and you know, they're trying to do their best to monitor, but what we might see at Northern Trust, Daniel might not see at his bank, and another bank might not see, but SWIFT is, I think, uniquely positioned because of their place in the marketplace.
So you think there is, first of all, a role for even just education, telling people what essentially there is even out there that they can take advantage of?
Yeah, absolutely.
I think so, and I think SWIFT also provides a very good forum and an opportunity for that discussion and dialogue between institutions to share their experiences and to potentially share best practice.
Okay, well, whilst we've been chatting and you haven't been looking, Ivan has just joined us. It's the magic of television. Ivan Zarsaski, he is financial crime partner at Deloitte in Australia. They were all joking. They were saying that apparently you're going to be moderating a session where they're going to be at tomorrow, and they're hoping that you're not going to be just as fashionably late.
They were hoping it was virtual.
We've been having some discussions about, you know, what SWIFT can do in this area of financial crime. What are some of the things that banks are asking for at the moment in terms of this area? What are some of your impressions that you've had here at the conference with regards to this topic?
I think it's been quite interesting to understand just the depth of the information and data that is available within the network globally. And SWIFT is uniquely positioned in the global market space to provide those services and derive factors back to their members and their subordinates to be able to go ahead and mitigate financial crime. It's a unique opportunity.
Okay, let's talk a little bit about innovation and where it's going to come from, or where you think banks want the innovation, where specifically they're looking for innovation in this space.
Yeah, I think we touched on it slightly before. I mean, we're getting into a period of time, especially with financial crime systems, where the pressure is to assure that the system's actually working properly. So from an innovation point of view, I mean, there's an opportunity here now to start bringing into practice more industry standards and benchmark ways in which to actually go about optimizing these tools, and you know, there's an opportunity there for SWIFT or for other players to actually come in and assist with that growth and development within the industry, because historically it's very much been you put systems in, now it's actually a case of let's make sure that they're actually working.
Yeah, I think for me particularly, it's maybe in the area of economic sanctions. So there's been so much scrutiny. You know, there are a lot of different countries that have different lists. Some of them overlap, some of them don't. And what we're seeing in the industry today is information that might not be in a particular wire transfer, but nonetheless, a bank might get in trouble because somehow that transaction involves a sanctioned country. And so I think if there's innovation to be had, it's probably in that arena to really help banks collectively work together.
I think we're seeing innovation in the way that some services are being deployed, and the SWIFT sanctions testing and sanctions screening services are very good examples of that. I think we're also key to the innovation is actually how you build and drive business value, and for compliance especially, it's all about how do you put your hand up within the organisation to actually demonstrate that you're providing value, and I think that's the key piece of innovation that people have to focus on.
We all face extraterritorial legislation, and in that, economic trade sanctions figures high on the list. The data that comes through the SWIFT network and the other components can be used to enrich the opportunities of looking at and interdicting that which is of issue. As we look at extraterritorial law, inclusive of Dodd-Frank, it is becoming vast. Everything from payments revolving around oil, gas, and energy to sanctions, minerals, and so on, and that's pervasive around the world. So enriching the information, providing better indicators to the financial institutions of what they are actually dealing with in trade-based financing would be helpful.
Okay, well, we'll leave it right there. Thanks very much for joining us.